The telegram arrived on a morning when Darcy Nash had already been awake for 3 hours, wrestling with a leaking roof, a sick cow, and a 7-year-old who refused to eat his breakfast. She was 24 years old and felt closer to 40, her hands rough and calloused, her back perpetually aching from years of work that should have been shared by 2 parents instead of carried by one young woman who had never asked for any of it. The paper trembled slightly in her fingers as she read the words from the banker in Cannon City, Colorado, informing her that the loan on their small ranch was 3 months overdue, and foreclosure proceedings would begin if payment was not received within 30 days. She folded it carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket before anyone could see the fear that must have been written across her face. "Darcy, Tommy is pulling my hair again." 9-year-old Sarah's voice carried from the front room, high-pitched and indignant. "Tommy, stop it right now or you'll be mucking out the stable alone," Darcy called back, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who had been playing mother since she was barely more than a child herself. She was 12 when the fever took both their parents within a week of each other. 12. When she stood at their graves with 4 younger siblings clinging to her skirts. 12. When she made the promise that she would keep them all together no matter what it cost her. That had been 12 years ago, in 1870, when Cannon City was still rough around the edges, and the territory of Colorado was just beginning to settle into something resembling civilization. Now it was 1882. And while the town had grown up around them, Darcy felt like she had stayed frozen in that moment of grief and desperate determination, never given the chance to grow into herself, to discover who she might have been if her life had taken a different path. She wiped her hands on her apron and headed back inside their modest ranch house, taking in the familiar chaos. Tommy, at 7, was indeed pulling Sarah's braid while 14-year-old Marcus tried to ignore them both, his nose buried in a book he had borrowed from the schoolteacher. 16-year-old Rebecca stood at the stove, attempting to salvage the porridge that had burned while Darcy was outside dealing with the roof. "Let me," Darcy said gently, taking the spoon from Rebecca's hand. Her youngest sister had always been delicate, prone to headaches and fainting spells that the doctor in town said were just nerves but never seemed to get better. Darcy worried about her constantly, adding it to the ever-growing list of concerns that kept her awake at night. "I am sorry, I was not paying attention," Rebecca said softly, her pale face flushing with embarrassment. "It is all right. Why do you not go rest for a bit? You look tired." Darcy kept her voice light, but she could see the dark circles under her sister's eyes, the way she swayed slightly on her feet. Another thing she could not afford to fix, another problem she would have to solve with nothing but determination and prayer. The day crawled forward the way all her days did, packed so full of tasks that she barely had time to breathe between them. She repaired what she could of the roof, fed the animals, rode out to check on their small herd of cattle, came back to prepare lunch, helped Sarah with her reading, argued with Tommy about his chores, discussed with Marcus whether he should continue his schooling or start working full-time to help with expenses. Every decision felt impossibly heavy, every choice weighted with consequences she could barely comprehend. It was late afternoon when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching the house. Visitors were rare, and Darcy felt her shoulders tense automatically as she wiped her hands and stepped out onto the porch. A man on a dark bay horse was riding up their long drive, sitting easy in the saddle with the kind of natural grace that spoke of years spent in the saddle. He was tall, she could tell even from a distance, with broad shoulders and sun-darkened skin visible beneath the rolled sleeves of his work shirt. He pulled his horse to a respectful distance from the porch and tipped his hat. "Afternoon, madam. I am looking for the Nash Ranch." The man in town said this was the place. "This is it," Darcy said cautiously, shading her eyes against the sun to get a better look at him. He was younger than she had first thought, probably close to her own age, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes that were an unusual shade of green. His face was honest, open, with none of the calculating hardness she had learned to watch for in men who came calling with schemes or propositions. "What can I do for you? Name is Lucas Morgan. I am looking for work, and I heard in town you might be hiring ranch hands." He dismounted as he spoke, his movements fluid and confident, leading his horse closer but still maintaining a polite distance. Darcy almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Hiring help. She could barely afford to feed the family she already had, let alone take on another mouth. "I think whoever told you that was mistaken. We are not hiring." Lucas Morgan looked around at the property, his gaze taking in the sagging fence line, the barn that needed fresh paint, the roof she had just been patching with materials she could barely afford. "Seems like you could use the help, though." "Needing help and being able to pay for it are two different things," Darcy said, more sharply than she intended. She softened her tone slightly. "I am sorry you rode out all this way for nothing, Mr. Morgan, but I cannot offer you a job." He was quiet for a moment, still looking around, and she wondered what he saw. A failing ranch, a woman in over her head, all the things she tried so hard to hide from the world. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. "What if I worked for room and board for now? Just until you get back on your feet. I am good with horses, decent with cattle, and I can fix just about anything that needs fixing." Darcy stared at him. "Why would you do that?" Lucas met her eyes directly, and she was surprised by the kindness she saw there. "Let us just say I know what it is like to need help and not have anywhere to turn. I have been there. If I can lend a hand now that I am back on my feet, well, seems like the right thing to do." She wanted to say yes so badly it physically hurt. The list of things that needed doing was endless, and there were only so many hours in a day, only so much one person could accomplish. But accepting charity, depending on someone else, went against every instinct she had developed over the past 12 years. She had learned early that the only person she could truly rely on was herself. "I do not take charity," she said finally, "not charity. Work." He gestured at the property again. "Plenty of it from the looks of things. I will earn my keep, I promise you that." Before Darcy could respond, the front door banged open and Tommy came barreling out, all energy and curiosity. "Who is that? Is that a real cowboy? Does he have a gun?" "Tommy inside," Darcy said firmly, but Lucas was already grinning. "I am a real cowboy, and yes, I have a gun, but it is just for protection from wildlife. Nothing exciting." He crouched down to Tommy's level. "What is your name, young man?" "Tommy Nash. I am 7 years old, and I can already ride a horse and rope a fence post sometimes." "Tommy," I said inside. Darcy's voice was sharper now, protective instinct flaring. She knew nothing about this man, no matter how kind his eyes seemed. Lucas straightened, his expression understanding. "I apologize. I did not mean to overstep." He turned back to his horse, gathering the reins. "If you change your mind about the work, I will be staying at the boarding house in town for a few days. Mrs. Henderson's place." He mounted up smoothly and tipped his hat again before turning his horse back down the drive. Darcy watched him go, her mind already second-guessing her decision. She could not afford help, but she also could not afford to lose the ranch. What good was pride if they all ended up homeless? At night, after the children were finally in bed, Darcy sat at the kitchen table with the ledger open in front of her, trying to find money that simply was not there. She had been over the numbers 100 times, and they never changed. They needed $300 to bring the loan current, and they had maybe $40 to their name. Even if she sold every cow they had, it would not be enough, and then what would they do next year? Rebecca appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl despite the warmth of the evening. "You should sleep." "I will soon," Darcy said automatically, the same lie she told every night. Her sister moved closer, looking down at the ledger. "It is bad, is it not?" There was no point in lying. Rebecca was 16, old enough to understand. "It is bad. What are we going to do?" Darcy closed the ledger and rubbed her tired eyes. "I do not know yet, but I will figure something out. I always do." Rebecca was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "That man who came by today. Marcus said he was offering to work for just room and board. We do not know anything about him. We know he is willing to help when he does not have to. That says something." Rebecca moved to sit across from her sister, her pale face earnest in the lamplight. "Darcy, you cannot do everything yourself. You have been trying for 12 years and you are exhausted. I can see it. We all can." "I am fine." "You are not fine. You are 24 years old and you look older than Mrs. Henderson, and she is 50 if she is a day." Rebecca reached across the table to take her sister's roughened hands. "Let someone help, please." Darcy felt something crack inside her chest, some wall she had built so carefully to keep all the fear and exhaustion at bay. She blinked hard against the sudden burning in her eyes. What if he is not who he says he is? What if he is here to take advantage? I cannot risk you all. And what if he is exactly who he says he is? A good man offering help when we desperately need it. Rebecca squeezed her hands gently. "You taught us to be careful, but you also taught us that there is still goodness in the world. Maybe this is some of that goodness." Darcy wanted to argue, but she was so tired. Tired of carrying everything alone, tired of making every decision, tired of feeling like she was drowning while trying to keep everyone else's head above water. "I will think about it," she said finally. She did not sleep that night, lying awake in the small room she shared with Rebecca and Sarah, listening to their breathing and wondering what her parents would have done. Would they have accepted help from a stranger? Would they have been braver than she was, or more cautious? By morning, she had made her decision. The ride into Cannon City took an hour, time she could not really spare but felt necessary nonetheless. The town had grown considerably since her childhood, with proper wooden sidewalks now, and a bank, and a new church with a steeple that could be seen from miles away. She tied her horse outside Mrs. Henderson's boarding house and took a deep breath before climbing the steps to the front porch. "Mrs. Henderson answered her knock, her round face breaking into a smile. "Darcy Nash, what a pleasant surprise. Come in, come in." "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. I am actually looking for one of your guests, Lucas Morgan." The older woman's eyebrows rose with interest. "Lucas?" "Yes, he is here." "Nice young man, very polite. Let me fetch him for you." She disappeared into the house, and Darcy waited on the porch, her heart beating uncomfortably fast. This was foolish. She should leave before he came out, should go back to handling everything on her own the way she always had. Then Lucas Morgan stepped out onto the porch, and something in his expression, surprise mixed with something that looked like hope, made her stay. "Miss Nash," he said, and she noticed he had cleaned up since yesterday, his hair still damp from washing, his shirt pressed and neat. "I did not expect to see you." "I came to talk about your offer," Darcy said, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "If it still stands." "It does." She took a breath. "I want to be clear about something. I do not know you, and I do not trust easily. You will work for room and board, as you said, but you will sleep in the barn, not the house. You will not be alone with my sisters at any time. You will do the work I assign and nothing more, nothing less. If I find out you have lied to me about anything, or if you do anything to make me uncomfortable, you will leave immediately. Are we understood?" If he was offended by her directness, he did not show it. Instead, he nodded solemnly. "Understood completely, and I would not have it any other way. You are protecting your family, I respect that." "Then I accept your offer, Mr. Morgan." "Lucas," he said, extending his hand. "If we are going to be working together, might as well use first names." His hand was warm and calloused when she shook it, the grip firm but not crushing. "Darcy." "Pleased to officially meet you, Darcy. When do you want me to start? Can you be ready to ride out in an hour?" He grinned, and she was startled by how it transformed his face, making him look younger and somehow more approachable. "Give me 30 minutes. True to his word, Lucas was ready in half an hour, his few belongings packed on his horse. They rode back to the ranch mostly in silence, but it was not an uncomfortable quiet. Darcy found herself stealing glances at him, trying to figure out who this man really was and what had brought him to her door. When they arrived, she showed him to the barn, which had a small room in the back that had once been used by ranch hands when her father was alive. It was dusty and filled with old equipment, but Lucas just looked around and nodded. "This will do fine. I have stayed in worse, believe me." Over the next few days, Darcy watched him carefully, waiting for some sign that she had made a mistake, that he was not what he seemed. But Lucas simply worked. He worked from sunrise to sunset without complaint, tackling the endless list of repairs and maintenance that she had been unable to keep up with. He fixed the fence line, patched the barn roof, repaired the water trough, and handled their small herd of cattle with an expertise that spoke of years of experience. More surprising was how he interacted with her siblings. He was patient with Tommy's endless questions, respectful toward Rebecca's shyness, genuinely interested in the books Marcus was reading, and gentle with Sarah's tendency to chatter. He never overstepped, never tried to discipline them or assume authority, but they gravitated toward him anyway, hungry for adult male attention they had not had since their father died. "Where did you learn to work with horses like that?" Marcus asked one evening, watching as Lucas worked with one of their more temperamental mares. "My father had a ranch up in Wyoming Territory. I grew up in the saddle." Lucas kept his voice calm, his movements slow and steady as the mare gradually relaxed under his hands. "What happened to the ranch?" Something flickered across Lucas's face, gone too quickly for Darcy to identify. "Sold it after my father passed. Needed a fresh start." He did not elaborate, and Marcus, sensing the boundary, did not push. But Darcy filed the information away. Another small piece of the puzzle that was Lucas Morgan. A week after he arrived, disaster struck in the form of a sudden summer storm that swept down from the mountains with almost no warning. Darcy was in the house preparing supper when she heard Lucas shouting. She ran outside to find him pointing toward the pasture where their cattle were huddled nervously, the sky above them already dark and threatening. "We need to get them closer to the barn," Lucas called over the rising wind. "This is going to be bad." There was no time to argue. Darcy grabbed her hat and ran for the stable, Marcus close behind her. Together, the three of them rode out into the pasture, working to herd the nervous cattle toward the safety of the barn and the nearby shelter. The storm hit before they were halfway there, rain coming down in sheets so thick she could barely see, lightning cracking across the sky close enough that she could feel the static in the air. One of the steers panicked, breaking away from the herd and running blind. Lucas took off after it without hesitation, disappearing into the rain. Darcy felt her heart jump into her throat, fear for this man who had become so important to their survival mixing with fear for the animals they could not afford to lose. She and Marcus managed to get the rest of the herd into shelter, then stood in the barn doorway peering out into the storm, waiting. Time stretched impossibly long, each minute feeling like an hour. Rebecca appeared with blankets, Sarah and Tommy huddled behind her, all of them drawn by the violence of the storm. Then, through the rain, Darcy saw movement. Lucas emerged from the downpour, leading the wayward steer, his clothes plastered to his body, his hat long gone. Relief flooded through her so strongly that her knees went weak. He got the steer secured and then stood for a moment, water streaming from his hair, breathing hard. When he looked up and met Darcy's eyes, something passed between them, some understanding that had not been there before. "You should not have done that," she said, her voice not quite steady. "It is just a steer, not worth risking your life." Lucas pushed his wet hair back from his face, his green eyes serious. "It is not just a steer to you. It is part of what keeps your family fed and safe. That makes it worth it." Inside her chest, something that had been frozen for 12 years began, very slowly, to thaw. The storm passed, leaving the ranch muddy and battered but intact. That evening, after everyone else had gone to bed, Darcy brought a fresh pot of coffee out to the barn. Lucas was in his room, attempting to dry out his clothes by the light of a single lantern. "I brought coffee," she said from the doorway. "Thought you might need it." He looked up, surprise crossing his face. "Thank you. That is kind of you." She stepped inside, setting the pot and 2 cups on the rough wooden table. "I also wanted to thank you. For today, you went above and beyond what I am paying you for." "You are not paying me anything," Lucas pointed out, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Exactly. Which makes what you did even more remarkable." She poured coffee for them both, then hesitated before asking the question that had been nagging at her since he arrived. "Why are you really here, Lucas?" He took the cup she offered, wrapping his hands around it even though the evening was warm. "I told you I needed work. There are plenty of ranches that would pay you actual wages. You are good at what you do, I have seen that. So why work for just food and shelter?" Lucas was quiet for a long moment, staring down into his coffee. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "My father died 2 years ago, left me the ranch, which should have been a blessing. But he also left debts I did not know about. I spent a year trying to save it, working myself into the ground, and it still was not enough. When they foreclosed, I felt like I had failed him, failed everything he had built." He looked up at her then, and she saw old pain in his eyes, the kind she recognized because she carried it herself. "I spent the last year drifting, working odd jobs, trying to figure out who I was if I was not my father's son running my father's ranch. And then I came through Cannon City and heard about the Nash Ranch. About a young woman raising 4 siblings on her own, refusing to give up no matter how hard things got." He smiled slightly. "I guess I saw something of myself in that, the determination, the refusal to quit. And I thought maybe if I could not save my own family's ranch, I could at least help someone save theirs." Darcy felt her throat tighten. "We might not be able to save it anyway. The loan is 3 months overdue. I have 30 days to come up with $300 or we lose everything." She had not meant to tell him that, had not meant to show that much vulnerability. But something about sitting here in the lamplight, both of them exhausted from the day's crisis, made it feel safe to speak the truth out loud. Lucas leaned forward, his expression intense. "Then we have 30 days to figure out how to earn $300. Darcy, you do not have to carry this alone anymore." She wanted to protest, to remind him that this was not his problem, not his responsibility, but the words would not come. Instead, she found herself saying, "I do not know how to let someone help me." "Then let me teach you," Lucas said quietly. "The same way you are teaching me that losing one dream does not mean there are not other dreams worth having." The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility and the beginning of something neither of them could name yet. Finally, Darcy cleared her throat and stood. "I should let you get some rest. Tomorrow we can sit down and go over the finances, see if there is any way to make this work." "Darcy," Lucas said as she reached the door. She turned back. "Thank you for giving me this chance, for trusting me even when every instinct probably told you not to." "Thank you for being worth the trust," she replied softly. That night, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Darcy fell asleep without her mind racing through endless lists of problems and tasks. Instead, she thought about green eyes and quiet strength, and the unfamiliar feeling of hope beginning to bloom in her chest. The next morning they sat at the kitchen table after breakfast, the ledger open between them while the younger children did their chores outside. Rebecca sat with them, her quick mind useful for numbers, while Marcus hovered nearby, clearly wanting to be included in this adult discussion. Lucas studied the numbers for a long time, his brow furrowed. "All right. You have about 40 head of cattle. If you sold half of them at current market prices, you could raise maybe $200. Not quite enough. And then we would not have enough cattle to sustain us through next year," Darcy pointed out. "It would just be delaying the inevitable." "What about the horses?" Rebecca suggested. "We have 4 and we really only need 2. "Maybe another $40 there," Lucas said. He drummed his fingers on the table, thinking. "There is a cattle drive passing through next week, heading up to Denver. They always need extra hands and it pays well. If I signed on for the drive, I could probably earn $75, maybe $100. Darcy's chest tightened at the thought of him leaving, which was ridiculous. She had known him less than 2 weeks. That would take you away for at least a month. But it would get you closer to what you need. He met her eyes. "Unless you want to come with me." "They sometimes take women on as cooks or camp help. Would pay less, but it would be something." "I cannot leave the children for a month." "I could watch them," Marcus said quietly from his position by the stove. Everyone turned to look at him, and he straightened under their attention. "I am 14. Plenty of young men my age are already working full-time. I can handle the ranch for a month, especially if Rebecca helps." "Absolutely not," Darcy said immediately. "That is too much responsibility." "You were 12 when you took on 4 of us," Marcus pointed out, his voice steady. "I am 14, and you would only be leaving me too. Tommy and Sarah are old enough to handle their own chores, and Rebecca can help with the cooking and planning. We can do this, Darcy. Let us help." She looked around at her siblings, seeing the determination in their faces. When had Marcus become so grown up? When had they all stopped being the helpless children she had been protecting all these years? "I do not know." "There is another option," Lucas said carefully. "I know the foreman of that cattle drive. If I talk to him, he might be willing to take Marcus on as a wrangler. The work is hard, but he is old enough, and it would mean both of us earning money toward the debt." "No." Darcy's response was immediate and sharp. "Cattle drives are dangerous. People get hurt, killed even." "People get hurt here too," Marcus said. "Remember when that horse threw you last year and you broke your arm? Risk is everywhere, Darcy. At least on a cattle drive, the risk would be earning us something." "He would be with me the whole time," Lucas added. "I would watch out for him, teach him what he needs to know. Your brother is smart and capable. This could be good for him." Darcy felt like she was being pulled in too many directions at once. Every protective instinct she had was screaming at her to refuse, to keep her brother safe at home where she could watch over him. But another part of her, the part that had been making impossible decisions for 12 years, knew they were right. They needed money, and this was a way to earn it. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "The drive leaves in 6 days," Lucas said gently. "I am not trying to push you, but we do not have a lot of time to decide. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and worry. Darcy found herself watching Marcus closely, seeing him through new eyes. He was nearly as tall as Lucas now, his shoulders broadening, his face losing the softness of childhood. He worked hard without being told, handled the horses with confidence, and showed a maturity that she had somehow missed while she was too busy managing everything else. On the third day, she found Lucas in the barn, checking over his tack. "If I agree to this," she said without preamble, "you have to promise me you will keep him safe. No unnecessary risks. No letting him do anything that could get him killed." Lucas straightened, his expression serious. "I promise. I will watch over him like he was my own brother." "And you have to promise me something else." She took a breath. "Promise me you will come back." Something shifted in his eyes, warming from simple understanding to something deeper. "That worried about me, are you? Do not flatter yourself." "I am worried about losing a good ranch hand," Darcy said, but her voice lacked conviction. Lucas stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. "I will come back, Darcy. You have my word on that." "Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "You do not owe us anything. You have already done more than we had any right to ask. Why would you promise to come back?" He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair that had escaped her braid behind her ear. His touch was gentle, barely there, but it sent warmth through her entire body. "I thought that would be obvious by now." Her heart was beating so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "Nothing is obvious to me anymore. Then let me be clear." His hand lingered near her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I am coming back because in the last 2 weeks, this place has started to feel more like home than anywhere I have been since I lost my father's ranch. I am coming back because your siblings feel like the family I thought I had lost. And I am coming back because when I look at you, I see the strongest, most incredible woman I have ever met, and I want to know her better. I want to be here when she finally lets herself rest. I want to be the one she leans on when things get hard, if you will let me." Darcy could not breathe. No one had ever spoken to her like this, had ever seen her as anything other than the capable one, the strong one, the one who kept everything together. No one had ever suggested that she might need someone, might want someone. "I do not know how to do that," she whispered. "I do not know how to let someone in." "We will figure it out together," Lucas said. "When I get back. But right now I need you to trust me with your brother. Can you do that?" It took every ounce of courage she had, but she nodded. "Yes, I trust you." The morning the cattle drive was set to leave, the whole family rode into Cannon City to see them off. It was early, the sun just beginning to paint the sky pink and gold, and the main street was already crowded with cattle and cowboys preparing for the journey ahead. The foreman, a grizzled man named Pete Carson, looked Marcus up and down with a critical eye. "You done this kind of work before, boy?" "No, sir, but I am a hard worker and a fast learner. Lucas here vouches for you, and he is one of the best hands I have ever worked with, so I will take you on. But you pull your weight or you are out. Understood?" "Yes, sir." Tommy was practically vibrating with excitement, firing questions at Marcus about the drive while Sarah clung to his sleeve, suddenly reluctant to let him go. Rebecca gave him a long hug and whispered something in his ear that made him nod solemnly. Then it was Darcy's turn. She pulled her brother aside, away from the others, and fought to keep her voice steady. "You listen to Lucas and Mr. Carson. Do not take foolish risks. Watch yourself around the cattle and the river crossings. Write to me if you can. Let me know you are all right." "I will be fine, Darcy." Marcus hugged her tightly. "You have been taking care of all of us for so long. Let me do this for the family. Let me help save our home." She pulled back to look at him, this boy who was becoming a man right before her eyes. "When did you get so grown up?" "I had a good teacher," he smiled. "You did it, you know. You kept your promise. You kept us all together. Whatever happens now, you already succeeded." Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You come home safe to me, Marcus Nash." "I will. I promise." Then Lucas was there, his hand warm on her shoulder. She turned to face him, all too aware of her siblings watching, of the knowing look in Rebecca's eyes. "Keep him safe." "I will." Lucas's hand moved from her shoulder to briefly touch her face, a gesture that was over before anyone else could really notice it, but that she felt all the way to her bones. "And I will keep my other promise too. I will come back. I will be waiting," she said, and meant it in ways that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Then they were mounting up, joining the flow of cattle and cowboys preparing to move out. Darcy stood with her family on the wooden sidewalk, watching until Lucas and Marcus were lost in the crowd, until the whole drive had moved out of town in a river of dust and bellowing cattle and jingling tack. "He is sweet on you," Rebecca said quietly as they walked back to their wagon. "I do not know what you are talking about." Her sister laughed, a rare sound that made Darcy's heart lift slightly. "Yes, you do, and you are sweet on him too. I have never seen you look at anyone the way you look at him. This is hardly the time for such things. We are about to lose our home, in case you have forgotten." "Which is exactly why it is the perfect time," Rebecca argued. "Darcy, you have spent 12 years putting everyone else first. Maybe it is time to let yourself have something for you. Let yourself be happy." Darcy wanted to argue, but the truth was she did not have a good counterargument. The thought of Lucas, of the way his hand had felt against her face, of the promise in his eyes, filled her with a warmth she had not felt in years. Maybe Rebecca was right. Maybe, if they could just survive this crisis, there could be something more waiting on the other side. The month that followed was the longest of Darcy's life. With both Lucas and Marcus gone, the workload fell heavily on her shoulders again. But this time, Rebecca and even Sarah and Tommy stepped up in ways they had not before. Rebecca, despite her delicate health, proved surprisingly capable of managing the household. Sarah took over more of the cooking, and Tommy, though he complained, handled his chores without his older brother there to oversee him. They sold 2 of their horses for $40, which Darcy immediately sent to the bank with a note explaining that more would be coming. It bought them time, if nothing else. She also spent a week in town taking in sewing work, sitting up late into the night with needle and thread, earning pennies that slowly accumulated into dollars. Every night, she found herself looking toward the road, waiting for some sign of the returning cattle drive, even though she knew it was far too early. She worried about Marcus constantly, imagining 1,000 different disasters. But she also found herself thinking about Lucas, about the promises they had made, about what might happen when he returned. 3 weeks into their absence, a letter arrived. Darcy tore it open with shaking hands and found Marcus's careful handwriting filling the page. He was well, the work was hard but rewarding. Lucas was teaching him things about cattle and horses he had never known. They expected to reach Denver in another week, and then they would start the journey home. At the bottom, in different handwriting, was a short addition. "He is doing great. You should be proud, and I am counting the days until I see you again. Lucas." Darcy read those 2 lines over and over until she had them memorized, her heart doing strange things in her chest. The 4th week dragged by with agonizing slowness. Darcy threw herself into work, repairing what she could, maintaining what she could not repair, trying to keep the ranch from falling apart while they were short-handed. She was in the barn late one afternoon, struggling to move a hay bale that was probably too heavy for her, when she heard hoofbeats in the yard. Her heart leaped into her throat. She dropped the hay bale and ran outside, shading her eyes against the late afternoon sun. 2 riders were coming up the drive, and even from a distance she recognized them. Marcus on the smaller bay, Lucas on his dark horse, both of them dusty and tired but unmistakably whole and safe. She ran to meet them, all dignity forgotten, her skirts hiked up to keep from tripping. Marcus dismounted before his horse had even fully stopped and swept her into a hug that lifted her off her feet. "We did it, Darcy. We made it." She hugged him back fiercely, checking him over with her eyes. He looked older somehow, his face sun-browned, his posture more confident. "You are all right. You are not hurt. I am fine. Better than fine, it was incredible." Marcus was talking fast, the way he always did when he was excited. "Darcy, we saw mountains and crossed rivers, and I learned so much about working cattle. Lucas taught me how to read their behavior, how to spot trouble before it starts. Mr. Carson said I was one of the best young hands he has ever worked with. He even said I could join them again next drive if I want." "We can talk about that later," Darcy said, reluctant to think about sending him away again so soon. She looked past her brother to where Lucas was still mounted, watching them with a smile that made her knees weak. "You kept your promise. Did you doubt me?" Lucas swung down from his horse, moving stiffly after the long ride. He looked tired, lines of exhaustion around his eyes, but his gaze was warm as it met hers. "Maybe a little," she admitted. He walked toward her, and there was something in his expression that made her aware of her siblings watching, of Tommy and Sarah running from the house to greet Marcus, of Rebecca standing on the porch with her hand pressed to her mouth. "Well, I am here, and I have something for you." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather pouch. The coins inside clinked together heavily as he handed it to her. $120. Marcus made 75 as a wrangler, and I made a bit extra helping with some horse trading in Denver. Add that to what you have already put together, and you should have enough to save the ranch. Darcy stared down at the pouch in her hands, feeling the weight of it, the solid reality of it. Tears spilled over despite her best efforts to contain them. "I cannot believe this. I cannot believe you did this." "We did this," Lucas corrected gently. "All of us together. That is how family works, Darcy. That is how it is supposed to work." She looked up at him, this man who had ridden into her life just over a month ago and changed everything. "We are not your family." His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. "You could be, if you wanted to be." The world seemed to narrow down to just the two of them, to his green eyes looking into hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "Lucas, Darcy, I know this is fast. I know we have barely had time to know each other. But in the weeks I was gone, all I could think about was coming back here to you and this place. I do not want to just work for you anymore. I want to work with you. I want to be your partner in the ranch and in life. I want to help you raise these kids and fix this place up and build something real and lasting." Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "That is a lot of wanting, I know, and if it is too much, too soon, I will wait. I will give you time. But I needed you to know, needed you to understand that when I said I was coming back, I meant it. I am not going anywhere, Darcy Nash, not unless you tell me to go." She was vaguely aware of Marcus herding the younger children into the house, giving them privacy. Rebecca caught her eye from the porch and smiled before following the others inside. Then it was just her and Lucas, standing in the yard as the sun painted everything golden around them. "I do not know how to do this," she said, echoing the words she had spoken to him in the barn weeks ago. "I have been alone for so long, responsible for everything for so long. I do not know how to be just Darcy instead of the person who takes care of everyone else." "Then let someone care for you now," Lucas said softly, pulling her closer. "Let me care for you. Let me help carry the weight. You do not have to do everything alone anymore." The words broke something open inside her, some dam that had been holding back 12 years of exhaustion and fear and desperate loneliness. She leaned into him, letting him wrap his arms around her, and for the first time since she was 12 years old, Darcy Nash let herself be held. They stood like that for a long time, until the sun began to set, and the evening cool settled over the ranch. Finally, Lucas pulled back just enough to look down at her. "So, do I get to stay?" "You get to stay," she whispered. Then, gathering all her courage, she added, "Not in the barn, though, eventually, when we are married." His grin was brighter than the sunset. "Is that a proposal, Miss Nash?" "Maybe it is. What are you going to do about it?" Lucas laughed and kissed her forehead, then her cheek, and finally, softly, her lips. It was Darcy's first kiss, and it was everything she had never let herself dream about, tender and sweet and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, she was trembling. "I guess I am going to have to marry you then," Lucas said, still grinning. "Lucky for you, I happen to be free." They went inside together, hand in hand, to find the entire family gathered in the kitchen pretending they had not been watching through the windows. Rebecca was beaming, Marcus looked satisfied, and even Tommy and Sarah were bouncing with excitement. "Does this mean Lucas is staying forever?" Sarah asked. "It means Lucas is going to be your brother," Darcy said, squeezing his hand. "If that is all right with everyone." The cheer that went up was answer enough. The next day they rode into Cannon City together, the whole family crowding into the wagon. Darcy walked into the bank with Lucas beside her, and the leather pouch heavy in her hands. The banker, Mr. Whitmore, looked skeptical when she dumped the coins onto his desk. "I believe this brings our loan current," Darcy said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. $315. Mr. Whitmore counted it twice, his expression shifting from skepticism to surprise. "This is correct. The loan is current." He looked up at her with something like respect. "I will not lie to you, Miss Nash. I did not think you would be able to do it." "She had help," Lucas said, his hand warm on the small of her back. "Turns out she does not have to do everything alone anymore." Walking out of that bank with the ranch secured felt like waking from a long nightmare. Darcy took a deep breath of the Colorado air and felt lighter than she had in 12 years. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Cannon City, with half the town in attendance. Darcy wore a simple dress that Rebecca had helped her sew, white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Lucas wore his best suit, his dark hair combed back, his green eyes bright with happiness as he watched her walk down the aisle. Marcus gave her away, standing straight and proud, and Darcy had to fight back tears as she placed her hand on Lucas's arm. Rebecca stood as her maid of honor, Sarah scattered wildflowers, and Tommy served as ring-bearer with only minimal fidgeting. When the preacher asked if anyone objected to the union, Tommy raised his hand. There was a moment of shocked silence before he said, "I object to waiting any longer. Can they just kiss already?" The church erupted in laughter, and even the preacher cracked a smile before finishing the ceremony quickly. When Lucas finally kissed her, Darcy felt like her heart might burst from the sheer joy of it. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Darcy had to learn to share not just her space but her responsibilities, to let Lucas make decisions alongside her instead of carrying everything on her own shoulders. It was harder than she expected, 12 years of habit fighting against every attempt to change, but Lucas was patient. When she woke in the middle of the night in a panic, convinced she had forgotten something crucial, he held her and talked her through it. When she tried to do too much, working herself to exhaustion, he gently took tools from her hands and made her rest. When she struggled to ask for help, He simply started doing things without being asked, anticipating needs before she had to voice them. And slowly, gradually, she learned. She learned that letting someone help did not make her weak. She learned that sharing burdens made them lighter, not heavier. She learned that love was not just about protecting and providing, but also about allowing yourself to be protected and provided for. The ranch began to thrive in ways it never had when she was managing it alone. Lucas had ideas about expansion, about improving their herd, about better water management. Together, they made plans for the future, real plans that extended beyond just surviving to the next season. Marcus, emboldened by his success on the cattle drive, announced his intention to learn the cattle business properly. With Lucas as his mentor, he threw himself into the work with a passion that made Darcy proud. Rebecca's health improved with the reduction of stress in the household, and she began helping the schoolteacher in town, discovering a talent for teaching that surprised no one but herself. Sarah and Tommy continued to grow, no longer burdened by the tension that had pervaded the house when they were on the verge of losing everything. A year after their wedding, Darcy stood on the porch of their ranch house, one hand resting on her swollen belly, watching Lucas and Marcus work with the horses in the corral. The ranch was thriving now, the loan paid down significantly, new cattle purchased, repairs made and maintained. More than that, though, the constant fear that had been her companion for 12 years had finally faded. Lucas caught sight of her and waved, then said something to Marcus before walking over. He climbed the porch steps and pulled her into his arms, his hand settling over hers on her belly. "How are you feeling?" "Fat and uncomfortable," Darcy said, but she was smiling. "The baby has been kicking all morning." "Already restless like his mother," Lucas teased, dropping a kiss on her temple. "What makes you think it is a boy? Just a feeling, though a girl would be nice too." "Maybe one with your stubbornness and determination." Darcy elbowed him gently. "I am not stubborn. You are incredibly stubborn. It is one of the things I love most about you." He turned her to face him, his expression growing more serious. "You know what today is? Thursday. It is the anniversary of the day I first rode up to this ranch, and you told me you did not need any help." His thumb traced circles on her belly. "Best decision I ever made, not listening to you. I seem to recall you offering to work for just room and board like some kind of vagrant. And you took me up on it like some kind of desperate woman." His grin made her laugh. "Look at us now." "Look at us now," Darcy echoed softly, leaning into his warmth. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting everything gold and pink, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, the future felt bright with possibility instead of heavy with worry. Their son was born 3 months later, in the early morning hours of a cool autumn day. Lucas paced the floor outside their bedroom while Rebecca and the midwife attended Darcy, wearing a path in the floorboards with his worry. When Rebecca finally emerged and told him he had a healthy baby boy and his wife was asking for him, he nearly knocked her over in his rush to get inside. Darcy looked exhausted but radiant, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, their son cradled in her arms. Lucas sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny face, feeling something huge and overwhelming sweep through him. "What should we name him?" Darcy asked softly. "I was thinking Thomas, after your father, if that would not be too painful." Her eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Thomas Morgan. I think Papa would have liked that." Little Thomas was a quiet baby, content to watch the world with serious dark eyes that reminded Lucas of Darcy. The siblings were all besotted with him, fighting over who got to hold him, Sarah mothering him with a protectiveness that made Darcy laugh. Life settled into a rhythm that felt right in a way nothing ever had before. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Marcus, at 16, was already talking about saving money to buy his own land someday. Rebecca had become indispensable to the school in town and had started courting the new deputy sheriff, a serious young man named James who treated her like precious glass. Sarah and Tommy were growing like weeds, full of energy and dreams for their futures. 2 years later, Darcy gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Emily. She had Lucas's green eyes and her mother's stubborn chin, and she ruled the household from the moment she arrived. Thomas adored his baby sister, toddling after her protectively even when he was barely steady on his own feet. One evening, when Emily was 6 months old and Thomas was a precocious 3-year-old, the entire family gathered for Sunday dinner as had become their tradition. The table was crowded with Nashes and Morgans, plus Rebecca's James and the schoolteacher Miss Porter, who had become a close friend. The house rang with laughter and conversation, with the clatter of dishes and the sound of children playing. Darcy stood at the stove, dishing out stew, and felt Lucas come up behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Happy," he murmured in her ear. She leaned back against him, taking in the scene before her. Her siblings, healthy and thriving, no longer burdened by poverty and fear. Her children, beautiful and loved. Her husband, solid and warm and steadfastly by her side. More than I ever thought possible. "You did this, you know," Lucas said softly. "You held them together when it should have been impossible. You saved them all." "We saved them," Darcy corrected. "I could not have done it without you. I would have lost everything if you had not ridden up that day and refused to leave." "Best day of my life," Lucas said, turning her to face him. "Second only to the day you agreed to marry me. You remember that I proposed to you, right? I remember you being too stubborn to let me propose properly." He kissed her nose. "But I am not complaining. I got what I wanted either way." Marcus called them to the table then, and they joined the family, Thomas climbing into Lucas's lap while Emily cooed from her basket nearby. Grace was said, food was served, and conversation flowed easily around the table. Later, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Lucas and Darcy sat on the porch in the cool evening air. The ranch spread out before them, peaceful and prosperous in the moonlight. Thomas was finally asleep after protesting bedtime for an hour, and Emily was fed and content. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had turned me away that first day?" Lucas asked, his arm around Darcy's shoulders. "Sometimes. Usually in the middle of the night when I cannot sleep." She tilted her head to look up at him. "I think we would have lost the ranch. I think I would have kept trying to do everything alone until I broke completely. I think my siblings would have been scattered to whoever would take them. I think I would have spent the rest of my life feeling like I failed the only promise that ever really mattered." "You would never have failed," Lucas said firmly. "You would have found another way. You are the strongest person I know. Strength is not the same as stubbornness, no matter what you say. And being strong does not mean I had to do it all alone." She took his hand, threading their fingers together. "You taught me that. You taught me that asking for help is not weakness, that letting someone care for you is not giving up control. You taught me that I could be Darcy the person, not just Darcy the caretaker. And you taught me that losing one dream does not mean you are finished," Lucas countered. "You taught me that family is not just about blood, and home is not just about land. You taught me what it means to never give up, even when everything seems impossible." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. An owl hooted somewhere in the distance, and one of the horses nickered softly in the barn. "I want more," Darcy said suddenly. Lucas looked at her in surprise. "More children, maybe eventually. But right now, I mean more of this. More family dinners and quiet evenings and watching our children grow. more working side by side with you, more building this life we have created." She turned to face him fully. "I spent 12 years just trying to survive, to get through each day. I want to spend the next 12, the next 50 actually living. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." Lucas pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "And I want to spend every one of those years with you, watching you thrive instead of just survive, watching you be happy." "I am happy," Darcy said. "For the first time since my parents died, I am genuinely, completely happy. And it is all because a stubborn cowboy refused to take no for an answer." "I prefer to think of it as determined," Lucas said with a grin. "And you are welcome." She swatted his arm playfully, then grew more serious. "Thank you, though, truly, for seeing something in me worth saving, for giving me permission to need someone, for loving me when I did not think I had anything left to give. You had everything to give, Darcy. You just needed someone to help carry the load." He cupped her face in his hands, his green eyes intense in the moonlight. "I love you. I will love you every day for the rest of our lives. And I will never stop being grateful that you took a chance on a drifter who showed up claiming he just needed work." "I love you too," she whispered, and kissed him under the Colorado stars, tasting home and happiness and the promise of a future they would build together. The years continued to unfold in a pattern of quiet joys and manageable challenges. The ranch grew more prosperous each year, allowing them to hire actual ranch hands and ease some of the workload. Marcus bought his own small spread at 20, with Lucas and Darcy's help, and began building his own cattle operation. Rebecca married James and moved into town, where she continued teaching and eventually had 3 children of her own. Sarah surprised everyone by developing a passion for veterinary medicine, learning from the town doctor who treated animals alongside people. She became the first woman veterinarian in Cannon City, serving ranchers throughout the region. Tommy grew into a restless young man who loved the ranch but loved adventure more, eventually joining the railroad and sending back letters from all the places he visited. Thomas and Emily grew up on a thriving ranch, never knowing the fear and desperation that had defined their mother's youth. They were joined by 2 more siblings, a brother named Daniel when Emily was 4, and another daughter, Grace, 3 years after that. The Morgan children were confident and loved, secure in ways Darcy had never been as a child. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Lucas surprised Darcy with a trip to Denver, their first real vacation since they had married. They left the children with Rebecca and James and spent 3 days in the city, visiting theaters and restaurants, walking through parks, doing all the things that ranchers never had time for. On their last evening, they sat in a fancy restaurant, Darcy wearing a new dress that Lucas had insisted on buying her. She felt out of place among the city people, but Lucas looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the room. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, reaching across the table to take her hand. "About how different my life is now than I ever imagined it could be," Darcy admitted. "When I was 16, 17, 18, barely holding everything together, I never let myself dream about things like this. It felt too far out of reach, too impossible. And now I have everything I never let myself want, a husband who loves me, children who are happy and healthy, a home that is truly ours. My siblings all settled and successful," she smiled. "I do not think I would change a single thing about how we got here. Not even the parts where you were terrified and exhausted and convinced you were going to lose everything. Not even those parts. They made this all the sweeter." She squeezed his hand. "And they brought you to me. I would go through it all again if it meant ending up here." Lucas lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "You will never have to go through anything like that again. I promise you that. Whatever challenges come, we will face them together. Together, Darcy agreed. I like the sound of that. They returned home to chaos, as was typical when leaving 4 children with relatives for more than a day. Thomas, now 8, had apparently decided to teach Daniel, 5, how to ride a particularly spirited horse, resulting in both boys getting thrown and scraped up. Emily, at 6, had organized her cousins into some kind of elaborate play that had involved mud and the good tablecloth. Grace, at 2, had somehow gotten into Rebecca's preserves and was sticky from head to toe. But even in the chaos, it was clear they had been well loved and cared for. And as Darcy cleaned up children and Lucas assessed the damage to house and ranch, they kept meeting each other's eyes and grinning, because this was their life, messy and full and perfect in its imperfection. The years rolled on, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows. They lost the barn to fire one year and rebuilt it stronger. One winter was particularly harsh, and they lost a dozen head of cattle to the cold. Lucas broke his leg falling from a horse and spent 6 frustrating weeks unable to work. Darcy had a miscarriage between Daniel and Grace that left her grieving for weeks, but through all of it, they had each other. Lucas was there when Darcy cried over the baby she had lost, holding her and letting her grieve without trying to fix it. Darcy was there during Lucas's recovery, keeping him from going mad with inactivity and reminding him that healing took time. Together, they weathered the storms and celebrated the triumphs, building a life that was rich not despite its challenges, but because of how they faced them together. When Thomas turned 18, he announced his intention to take over the ranch someday, showing the same dedication to the land that his father had. Emily declared her desire to become a teacher like Aunt Rebecca. Daniel wanted to be a cowboy like his father, and little Grace, at 8, was still deciding between being a princess or a horse. On a warm summer evening, with the children old enough now to handle their own bedtimes, Lucas and Darcy found themselves back on the porch where they had spent so many evenings over the years. Darcy was 42 now, her dark hair threaded with silver, her hands still rough from work, but her face more peaceful than it had ever been in her youth. Lucas was 43, with lines around his eyes from years of sun and laughter, his dark hair graying at the temples. "You ever miss it?" Darcy asked suddenly. "Your father's ranch, the life you had before." Lucas was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes I miss my father, wish he could have seen what I have built here, met you and the children, but miss that life. No, that life was about living up to someone else's dreams. This life is about building our own." "Our own," Darcy repeated softly. She leaned against him, comfortable and content. "I spent so many years being afraid of failing, afraid of losing everything, afraid of needing anyone. And then you showed up and taught me that fear does not have to control you." "You taught yourself that," Lucas corrected. "I just gave you a safe place to learn it." Inside, they could hear the children talking and laughing, the sounds of family filling their home. The ranch spread out around them, prosperous and well-maintained, a testament to years of hard work and partnership. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled at the rising moon. "Lucas," Darcy said, turning to look up at him. "Thank you." "For what?" "For refusing to leave that first day. For seeing past the scared, stubborn woman who thought she had to do everything alone. For teaching me what it means to be part of a true partnership. For giving me a life I never thought I deserved." Her voice caught slightly. "For letting someone care for me when I had forgotten how to care for myself." Lucas pulled her close, his arms solid and sure around her. "Best thing I ever did was ride up to this ranch and meet you, Darcy Morgan. You gave my life purpose again. You gave me a family, a home, a reason to build something lasting. If anyone should be saying thank you, it is me." "Then we are both grateful," Darcy said, reaching up to kiss him. "For finding each other, for building this life, for every challenge and triumph along the way." As the years continued to pass, the ranch became something of a legacy. Thomas took over daily operations when he was 22, showing the same dedication and innovation his parents had. He married a strong young woman named Catherine from a neighboring ranch, and they started having children of their own, filling the house with yet another generation of Morgans. Emily did become a teacher, working alongside Rebecca until her aunt retired, and then taking over the school. She married a banker's son named William, and they had twins that kept everyone on their toes. Daniel joined Thomas in running the ranch, the two brothers working together as seamlessly as Lucas and Darcy did. Grace, true to her early ambitions, did not become a princess, but did marry a horse trader and spent her days working with the animals she loved. Marcus's ranch prospered alongside theirs, and the siblings stayed close, their children growing up together the way they once had. Rebecca's children were all successful in their various endeavors. Sarah's veterinary practice expanded to include a younger partner, ensuring her work would continue even as she aged. Tommy eventually settled down in California, married a woman he met on the railroad, and only returned to Colorado for visits, but his letters were regular and full of stories. Lucas and Darcy watched it all unfold from the center of the life they had built. They saw their children grow and thrive, saw their grandchildren born and begin their own journeys. They worked the ranch well into their 60s, only gradually turning over more and more responsibility to Thomas and Daniel. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole extended family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. There were nearly 50 people crowding the house and yard, 3 generations of Nashes and Morgans and the families they had married into. Tables groaned under the weight of food, children ran wild in the yard, and the sound of laughter and conversation filled the air. Darcy stood on the porch watching it all, feeling overwhelmed by the reality of what they had created. From 4 frightened orphans and 1 desperate young woman to this sprawling, thriving family. It seemed impossible, miraculous, a testament to the power of determination and love. Lucas came up beside her, his hair completely silver now but his green eyes still bright. He had aged well, still strong and capable despite his 63 years. "What are you thinking about? About how it almost did not happen? About how close we came to losing everything? About how different all this would be if you had not shown up that day?" She turned to face him, taking his weathered hands in hers. "About how grateful I am that you did." "I love you, Darcy Morgan," Lucas said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have loved you every single day of these 30 years, and I will love you for however many more we are given." "I love you too," Darcy replied. "Thank you for teaching me that I did not have to do it all alone. Thank you for being my partner in every sense of the word. Thank you for giving me this life." Their children called them then, wanting them to cut the cake that Emily and Catherine had spent all morning decorating. As they walked together toward the gathered family, hands clasped, Darcy felt a profound sense of peace. She had spent 12 years raising 4 siblings, carrying impossible burdens on shoulders too young to bear them. And then a cowboy had ridden up to her ranch and said, "Let someone care for you now." She had let him in, slowly and fearfully at first, and he had transformed her entire world. He had shown her that strength was not the same as stubborn independence, that letting someone help was not weakness but wisdom. He had given her partnership, love, family, and a future brighter than any dream she had allowed herself during those hard years of survival. As they stood surrounded by children and grandchildren, cutting a cake and posing for photographs and accepting hugs and well wishes, Darcy caught Lucas's eye and smiled. He smiled back, that same warm, open smile that had first made her want to trust him all those years ago. They had built something real and lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone. They had taken brokenness and fear and transformed it into love and legacy. And they had done it together, the way the best things in life were always done. The celebration continued into the evening, the family lingering long after the food was gone, reluctant to let the moment end. Finally, as the sun began to set in a spectacular display of orange and pink across the Colorado sky, people began to make their way home, hugging and promising to visit again soon. Eventually, it was just Lucas and Darcy again, sitting on their familiar porch, the ranch quiet around them once more. Inside, Thomas and Catherine were putting the last of the grandchildren to bed, their voices carrying softly through the open windows. 30 years, Lucas said, shaking his head in wonder. Where did the time go? Into building this, Darcy replied, gesturing at the ranch, the house, everything they had created together. Into raising children and running a business and creating a legacy, into loving each other. Best 30 years of my life, Lucas said firmly. And I am looking forward to 30 more if we are lucky enough to get them. Darcy laughed. We will be 94 and 83. I am not sure we will be much good at ranching by then. Then we will sit on this porch and watch our great-grandchildren do it. I do not care as long as I am with you. She leaned into him, comfortable and content, watching the last of the sunset paint the sky. From this vantage point, she could see the whole ranch spread out before them. The barn they had rebuilt after the fire, the expanded pastures where cattle and horses grazed, the new stable that Daniel had designed and built with his own hands. She could see the bunkhouse where their ranch hands lived, the equipment sheds, the corrals and pens. Everything neat and well-maintained, prosperous and productive. But more than the physical manifestation of their success, she could feel the intangible legacy they had created. The family bonds that remained strong across generations, the values of hard work and mutual support they had instilled in their children, the example they had set of what a true partnership looked like, what it meant to face life's challenges together rather than alone. Lucas, Darcy said softly. Thank you for not giving up on me, for seeing past the stubborn, scared woman who insisted she did not need help, for being patient while I learned to trust you, for teaching me that it was okay to lean on someone, to let someone care for me. You have already thanked me for that, Lucas pointed out gently, many times over the years. I know, but I do not think I can ever say it enough. You changed my life, Lucas. You saved me in ways that have nothing to do with money or ranches or any of the practical things. You saved the part of me that was slowly dying under the weight of all that responsibility. You reminded me that I was allowed to be human, to need things, to want things beyond just survival. Lucas turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to frame her face. His touch was as gentle as it had been 30 years ago when he first told her he was coming back. And you saved me right back. You gave me purpose when I had lost mine. You gave me a family when I thought I would never have one. You showed me what real strength looks like, what real love looks like. We saved each other, Darcy. That is what makes us work so well together. She kissed him then, a kiss that held 30 years of love and partnership, of challenges overcome and triumphs shared. When they pulled apart, she was smiling through happy tears. So what do you think? Lucas asked, his thumb brushing away a tear from her cheek. Should we aim for another 30 years? Absolutely, Darcy replied without hesitation. Though I reserve the right to do it from this porch, watching our grandchildren and great-grandchildren do all the hard work. Deal, Lucas said, laughing. We have earned that, I think. They sat together as darkness fell completely, the stars coming out one by one above them. Inside, they could hear Thomas and Catherine moving around, cleaning up the last of the celebration. A baby cried briefly and was quickly soothed. A door closed softly. This was their life now. Surrounded by family, secure in their love, confident in the legacy they had built together. It was so far from those desperate days when Darcy had stood alone, trying to hold everything together through sheer force of will. So far from the moment Lucas had ridden up their drive, a drifter looking for purpose. They had found their purpose in each other, in the family they created and the life they built. They had taken brokenness and transformed it into wholeness. They had taken fear and transformed it into faith. They had taken loneliness and transformed it into love. And as they sat on their porch under the Colorado stars, hands clasped, hearts full, they knew with absolute certainty that they would face whatever came next the way they had faced everything else. Together, with love and determination and unwavering faith in each other. The years ahead would bring their own challenges and joys. They would watch more grandchildren born, would see their children and grandchildren face their own trials, would eventually slow down and let the next generation take over completely. But through it all, they would have each other, would have this love that had transformed them both, would have the knowledge that they had done something remarkable with their lives. They had built a legacy not just of land and cattle and prosperity, but of love and family and partnership. They had shown their children and grandchildren what it meant to face life's challenges with courage and grace, what it meant to support and uplift each other, what it meant to build something lasting and meaningful. And it had all started with a simple question and an even simpler answer. Lucas had ridden up to a desperate young woman and offered to help. Darcy had eventually said yes. And from that simple beginning, they had created something extraordinary. As the night deepened around them and the ranch settled into peaceful quiet, Lucas pulled Darcy closer, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting on his chest. They sat like that for a long time, comfortable in the silence, secure in each other's presence. "I love you," Lucas said softly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I love you too," Darcy replied, her voice warm with contentment. "Always have, always will." And that really was what it all came down to. Love. The kind of love that sees past fear and stubbornness to the wounded heart beneath. The kind of love that offers help without expecting anything in return. The kind of love that builds slowly, steadily, until it becomes the foundation of everything else. The kind of love that lasts not despite life's challenges, but because of how those challenges are faced together. They had that kind of love, Lucas and Darcy. And it had made all the difference. The end.